Okay, so here's something that's been weighing on me, and reading this book has been a good opportunity to talk about what I've been trying to articulate about around this "we listen, we don't judge" commentary, right? And how social media, if we use it correctly, we can learn a lot about ourselves in the observation of others. So for a while, I've been having this feeling like everything does not need to be commented on. Everything doesn't need to have a response or rebuttal to. And that life is presenting us with an opportunity to just observe. And we don't know how to just observe, right? Even if you have the judgment, but to not let that judgment leak out in somebody's comment section, not to let that judgment leak out in making a video response or a stitch or duet, but that life is just giving us an opportunity to observe. And we learn so much about ourselves in the observation that gets lost because we're not just observing to learn something or see something or hold another perspective. We're observing to respond. And if we can just observe, just be an observer of what's being shown in front of you and drawing conclusions. But even if you draw a conclusion, it's not a conclusion that necessarily needs to be shared. Whether you share that conclusion through a stitch or a duet, or whether you share that conclusion through your comment in the comment section, just observe it. And that's a feeling I'm getting reading this book, because although I know the person who wrote the book, right, I feel like any art that is shared with you, right? Because when you create, whether you create a book, whether you create a product, whether you create content, it is art being shared with you. And for the people who do the most vulnerable of art, which is to share their life, to share their hopes, to share their failures, to share their ambition, that we've lost the reverence of being able to partake in that art, because we see everything as a thing to judge. So even when I see content like what's happening with this young woman, Morgan, when I watch her video, I feel like I am privileged to be observing this woman's life in the totality of it, especially in the moments of it where most people do not have the courage to share. Most of us will never have the ability to give to the world that level of vulnerability, right? Because we have been conditioned to believe that we keep our business in the house. We don't share those things. We don't share the ugly. We only present the pretty of ourselves. And so when people come and they lay in front of you the ugly of who they are, I just see that as a privilege to observe it, to see humanity in all of its range. We have been so conditioned to only see the beauty in humanity, to only see the pretty photos, to only see the well-curated house, the well-decorated house, the outfits that never look like shit, right? The makeup that is always done really well. We have been so conditioned to only see the pretty that when we see the ugly, we don't know how to sit in another person's humanness. And sometimes the content that you are being allowed to see is purely for observation. You're just there to observe it and to learn something about yourself from the content, as opposed to responding to the content with judgment. Does that make sense? Because that's how I feel like reading this book. Because although I know who this person is, I've engaged with this person, I feel like there's a privilege to be let into this person's life and to observe it, right? Because as I'm sitting here thinking, I can't believe that, she was that young being intimate, because it's not something I can imagine. But I don't hold judgment about it because it's something I didn't have to know. But it's something she chose to share. And there's a privilege in that. There's a privilege to be let in to somebody else's experience. Because when we let people into our experience, people will either see traces of themselves in that experience, or this is why they tell you, the best way to build empathy is to read. And this is why, beyond history and everything else, this is why a lot of books are being banned. Because the stories that are being shared allows you to cultivate and build empathy, because you're learning about somebody else. And sometimes in the learning about somebody else, you recognize yourself. It's always about empathy. It always will come back to that. Because although I'm reading this experience and I cannot imagine it for myself, the empathy of being raised with strict Caribbean parents, right? That creates that part of you that wants to sneak around. Because there were some things that I wasn't out doing the folks, right? But there were some things that I was sneaking around doing that I am glad my mother's dead and will never know it. And I myself will take it to the grave with me, right? But that sneaking around was birthed out of the shame that my parents gave me about things that should never have had shame attached to it. And so, yeah, when you see content or you read books, being able to understand that everything doesn't require a response or a judgment, it's an opening for you to observe. And to remember that when people are sharing their art with you, in whatever form that is, whether that's content creation, writing a book, creating a product, that to be able to come into that art with them, in whatever way you come into that, is a privilege. It is a privilege. She created this art. I bought into her art by buying the book. And there is a humility that I feel for being able to access somebody else's life in this way. And sometimes the most vulnerable things in their lives, things that I would not be willing to share about my life. I'm reading somebody who is. And there's something beautiful in that.